few months ago, I made a video about the seemingly endless array of new and exciting small-scale wargames that were vying for my attention, and luring me away from my current projects. Amongst such temptresses as Legions Imperialis and Warlords Epic Battles, one game stood out and pulled at my purse strings above all others: Armoured Clash. My futile attempts to resist came undone when a representative of Warcradle Studios got in touch to ask if I'd like to take a closer look at some of their lovely miniatures. Well, every man has his weak spots, and mine are miniatures and freebies, so it's fair to say that I was cock-a-hoop to receive such an offer. Even better was the fact that they were going to send me one of their hefty Battlegroup starter sets, which gives a player everything they need to build a large army and get playing with their chosen faction. And that is exactly what I've been busily working on in my free time for the last couple of months, and I'm finally at a point where I can show off some of my early progress into this new exciting hobby venture. Although Warcradle very kindly supplied me with the Battlegroup set I'm going to be showing off, I should clarify that at no point did they ask me for anything in return. No expectations were made of me saying nice things or even making any content at all. As such, all the opinions are my own, both good and bad, and my enthusiasm for Armoured Clash is just that. Hopefully this video will give anybody watching a good idea if Armoured Clash is a game for them or not. So, for those who might not know, what is Armoured Clash anyway? Well, Armoured Clash is a 10mm wargame released in late 2024 that focuses on a fictional sci-fi late 19th century setting where the world's great powers are frantically jostling for supremacy in a hostile and clandestine world. In my previous video I described the game as having a steampunk setting, but having now read more of the lore, I would say something like Weird Victoriana would be a more accurate description. There really isn't any steam power here at all. Instead, with the revelatory and dangerous discoveries of the alien element Sturginium and power sources such as RJ-1027, a symposium of scientists known as the Covenant of the Enlightened have been able to instigate unprecedented advances in engineering and industry. They have ushered in an age of phenomenal scientific advancement in areas that were the stuff of dreams only decades before. And that's true enough, because Armoured Clash has some truly bonkers contraptions to field on the tabletop. Like this. And this. Oh yeah, and definitely this. There are 8 great powers which make up the game's playable factions. The Alliance, led by the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, are broadly made up of the nations of France, Spain, Italy, Portugal and Brazil. Also known as the Latin Alliance, they are notorious for their well-equipped and well-trained troops armed with solar-powered rifles and their ability to deploy directly into battle via parachute pods. The Commonwealth stretches from Eastern Europe to Alaska, and its inhabitants are ruled with the iron fist of the Tsar. Troopers are conscripted for life and are well known for their refusal to flee even from the direst of situations. Despite using relatively crude technology, their armoured regiments and masses of infantry are still a terrifying force to be reckoned with. The Crown are the fading empire of Queen Victoria. Once the untouchable superpower of the world, the British Empire, including Canada, South Africa, India, Australia and New Zealand, fights for survival on all fronts from the would-be usurper great powers. Nevertheless, the Crown retains the military might that once made it the great power. The Empire are the united realms of the Far East, with traditions stretching back nigh 1,000 years. The Empire is ancient, mystical and insular, and its vast armies fight alongside terracotta automatons and fire-breathing pagoda landships. The Enlightened are a mysterious and mercurial organisation that are the architects and keepers of the alien technologies that have enabled the rapid progress of the recent age. They recruit their armies from the crippled and destitute, and with augmentations they have created a force of drone-like super soldiers. They reside throughout the world, and whether they use their immense power for good or evil remains to be seen. The Imperium are the Germanic nations of the Holy Roman Empire, encompassing Central Europe and Scandinavia. Despite being in the vulnerable position of being sandwiched between the Commonwealth and the Alliance, they maintain their territories with technological prowess that almost matches that of the Enlightened and an unrivaled network of intel. The Sultanate are the wealthy and ostentatious regions of the Middle East. Thanks to a close connection to the Enlightened, the Sultanate have access to some of the most advanced tech money can buy, and with a fighting force of fanatical infantry, they are as dangerous as any of the great powers. The Union are the youngest of the great powers, having gained their independence from the crown only a century ago. Bloody traitors. Yet fresh from a civil war between the North and South states over oil and mineral reserve disputes, they emerge united as freshly sharpened iron. As you can see, there's quite a mix of historical inspirations and a healthy dose of national stereotyping there. But it's all good natured though, and each faction has a really strong sense of character and visual identity. No two factions look alike, and that's quite a feat when you consider that they're all basically based on 19th century militaries. This game, even with the sci-fi slant, could have looked very boring, but instead it looks utterly ridiculous, and I love it. Each faction has a cool little section in the rulebook where a rival or enemy power will report intel on the level of threat they pose. I really enjoyed reading through these, as they give depth to the world beyond the big battles. You can imagine the plotting, spying and sabotage that's occurring behind the scenes, making the clashes feel like the culmination of something, rather than an abstract event. Right. With the scene set, let's go back a few months to when this chonky box of plastic distraction arrived. As you can see, this is the Crown Battlegroup starter box. Being a newly released game, not all of the factions have been released at the time of making this video. However, there have been steady releases since the game's launch 6 months ago, so it won't be long before every faction is covered. At launch, only the Empire and Crown were available, and they also make up the contents of the 2-player starter set, The Battle for Singapore. I genuinely couldn't choose a favourite between the two, but my love for the Crown's St Paul's Cathedral meets Sir Killalot landship design just tipped me in their favour, but we'll have a closer look at that in a bit. First of all, let's just take a moment to appreciate this glorious box art. Great stuff. And I actually found it quite a useful reference when it came to start painting, as being a 10mm scale game, some of the detail on the minis can be hard to interpret with the naked eye. Well, the naked middle-aged eye anyway. Opening up the box, we are presented with the A5 size rulebook and a huge double-sided poster with the box art on one side and a world map showing the territories of the great powers on the other. Lovely stuff. There's a flyer with a QR code which takes you to the website for Armoured Clash, which has lots of useful resources and lore to read. On the flip side is the equivalent for Armoured Clash's sister naval wargame, Dystopian Wars. I haven't looked into Dystopian Wars, so I can't speak on it personally, but it's definitely something I'm intrigued to learn more about. Flicking through the rulebook, you can see it's very nicely laid out and in full colour throughout. Having now read it cover to cover, I have to say it's very friendly even to simpletons like myself who normally struggle to focus when reading rules. Obviously I'm yet to play a game, so I can't speak to the rules per se, but they seem refreshingly straightforward on the face of it. After one read through, I felt like I could get stuck in straight away. One thing to note is that the army lists are digital only and accessible for free on the website. This enables Warcradle to make rapid changes as needed as feedback from the players comes in, and without the need for constant erratas or new editions of army books. At first, I found this a little disappointing, as I like my games to at least be able to function offline, but I think the reasoning does make a lot of sense. The game uses proprietary dice, and thankfully you get a decent amount in the box. This is one of 2 bags. There are 4 different symbols on the dice, and they are easily identifiable at a quick glance. As far as I know, these are the only dice used in the game, so bad luck for those with large collections of weighted dice. This is the deck of Command and Conquest cards, and these seem like a crucial part of the tactical gameplay in Armoured Clash. Each card contains both an effect that can influence the action on the battlefield, and an objective which can be carried out in order to score victory points. Only one may be used, however, as the card is discarded immediately after use. It seems like a clever mechanic to force players into making difficult decisions about whether to win small victories during the battle or whether to focus on the larger picture of scoring vital victory points. Okay, let's have a look at some miniatures, shall we? First out of the box was the awesome landship that sold me on the Crown as a faction. This is the only resin miniature in the box, and it's a pleasingly weighty thing. Look at how mega this thing is. Even at 10mm scale, this thing looks vast. I'm going to need to build up to painting this beast, so sadly that'll have to wait for a future video. Next up is a mountain of sprues. I know it's a small thing, but I love how they have little pegs and holes to stack nicely and keep the miniatures safe. That's satisfying. The first sprues are for the terrain which comes in the set. This is a completely modular set that enables you to make all sorts of building configurations. We'll give this a go later. Now onto the stacks of sprues that make up the Crown Army. Surprisingly, there are only 2 kinds of sprue, which contain the various units, artillery and tanks. They've absolutely rammed each sprue with minis, and there's very little wasted space. There are 4 of each of the sprues in total. The first is the Infantry Regiment sprue, which as you would expect has the various types of foot soldiers, but also some smaller artillery and transports. The second is the Armoured Regiment sprue and contains a heavy tank, large artillery, mechanised cavalry and bipedal mechs. And of course there's a stack load of bases. One thing to note is the banners, which are used for denoting a unit's officer. This becomes important for things like measuring range and line of sight. Taking a moment to make sure you're basing the miniatures correctly here is definitely recommended before gluing anything down. Also included is a sheet of cardboard tokens and some nifty plastic measuring tools. Right, how about we get some of these miniatures snipped out and ready for painting. There's a lot here, so I'm just going to be working on one of each of the sprues for now, so I can show off a bit of everything. Now, I did find these a little bit of a pain to clean up, as there were lots of visible mould lines, and they could be quite awkward to remove. I'm not sure if that's a problem that will vary between batches, but it was quite time consuming. I suppose it's partly down to the scale of the miniatures, as they will inherently be more awkward to work with, being smaller and with finer detail. Obviously, once it's done though, so not a huge problem. Another issue I had was in assembling the miniatures, as some come in a surprising number of separate pieces. In the case of the large artillery gun, it comes in something like 16 parts. It took me quite a while of dry fitting pieces together to see what bit went where, and this occurred on several of the miniatures. Unfortunately, it was too late by the time I spotted this handy QR code on the box for an online assembly guide. Okay, that's my bad. Luckily, I managed to muddle my way through without messing anything up too much. I didn't glue the minis on the bases at this stage, as it would make painting them difficult. Instead, I lightly glued them on to some straight sprues. I then blue tacked everything onto a wooden stick and primed with Wraithbone primer. I could then place the strips of minis on my painting handle for ease of, well, handling. The crewman for the large artillery gun seemed like a perfect tester for the army's paint scheme, so I got to work. I started with Blood Angel's red contrast and painted his coat. I then painted his trousers with a Sermon blue contrast. Then the boots were painted with Snakebite leather contrast. I then painted his belt and pouches with Black Legion contrast. I later decided to paint his elbow pads with this too. I then used Cadian Flesh Tone to paint the face. And I used white to both paint the shoulder belts and to tidy up the shoulder armour, gloves and anywhere else that needed it. I then used Imperial Fist contrast to paint the stitching on the front of the jacket and the shoulder armour. I used Apothecary white contrast to shade the white areas. And then used Reichland Flesh Shade to paint the face and yellow areas. I then picked out the buckle with silver and applied a bit of Nuln Oil. And I painted the pith helmet with Talon Sand. And with that, I felt like the miniature looked done. I didn't want to go too mad, as there are a lot of these guys to paint, and at this scale I think this is a decent enough standard. Using that method, I was then able to paint up the rest of the standard infantry, and here's how they came out. The one thing I've learned previously from painting 10mm miniatures is to make the colours pop, as they're going to be viewed from quite a distance. I think these guys definitely pop. What do you think? Using similar methods, I was then able to paint up the kilt-wearing Royal Engineer Sappers, the ridiculously cool looking Spitfire Rocketeers, I love these guys. And for the sharp rifles, I substituted a Dark Angel's green coat to match their namesake. I was somewhat surprised to see that the ones on the War Cradle website aren't painted green.
God oh bloody mighty!
I then painted up the small artillery guns, and that gave me a good idea of how to paint up the rest of the armoured units, including the large Mordred artillery gun. I started by covering the whole model in Leadbelcher. I then picked out areas I wanted to be gold and brass and painted them Balor brown. I ended up skipping this step with some other models as I found it a little bit too time consuming. I then painted Blood Angel's red contrast over some of the Leadbelcher areas, and this gave it quite a cool metallic red effect. I went over some of the Balor brown areas with Retributor armour. I then gave the Leadbelcher areas a wash of Nuln oil. I painted the remaining areas of Balor brown with Liberator gold. Things like the raised details on the red and the trim of the front facing armour. And then all of the brassy and gold areas were washed with Reikland Fleshshade. After a quick highlight of Stormhost silver and a few picked out details, it was looking good enough for the table. I always think that mostly metallic models look a bit pants, but in context and with the crew glued on, I think it'll look a lot better. Here's how the other armoured units look when painted up in the same way. Here's the Sterling Troop Carrier, the Galahad Medium Tank, the Black Watch Dragoons, and the Horse Guard Cavalry. With all the minis painted and ready for basing, I wanted to take a quick look at the terrain sprue. This time, armed with the assembly instructions, I had no trouble putting together a cool little industrial building. It's a clever little set, and although I've gone with a simple square, you can make buildings with multiple floors and of various geometric shapes. There's also a few different antennae and sentry guns to decorate with too. Very cool. Right, let's see how everything looks fully based and on the tabletop, and I can give my final thoughts on the Crown Battlegroup starter set. Overall, I'm really happy with how the army is looking so far. I do really love the miniatures in this game, and even with a uniformed paint scheme, there's still lots of visual interest to distinguish each unit. Initially, I was thinking of using more of a sandy or rocky basing theme, but the classic looking green flock contrasted really nicely with the red. As I said earlier, it's all about the pop at this scale. Obviously, I've still got a way to go before I have a fully painted playable army, but I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into playing games of Armoured Clash. The 2-player Battle for Singapore set only contains 2 of each sprue to make up the armies, so I think I'm halfway to being able to play some intro games. If you wanted to get into Armoured Clash yourself, the Battlegroup starter sets like the one I've just looked at are available from Wayland Games and currently cost £120. For a large army, rulebook, terrain and dice, I do think that's a very reasonable price. Smaller sets can be picked up from as little as £28 or £45 for a small army, and the 2-player starter set costs £95. It would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that the game just won the Best Miniatures Rules category at the 2025 UK Games Expo and the Best Miniature range for their Enlightened faction. So a big congratulations to the folks at Warcradle. So what do you think? Has some of my enthusiasm for Armoured Clash rubbed off on you at all? Can you see yourself picking up one of these sets? If so, I'd love to know which great power you're tempted to go for. Or maybe you're already an Armoured Clash player. If so, what tips do you have for a recent convert like myself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.